Hello and welcome to Power to the People with me, Graeme Pryce. We've had a little look at the Secretary of State for Tory propaganda on this channel before when we discussed 5 of the many reasons Laura Keunssberg is definitely a Tory twat. Well, now she is the Shadow Secretary of State for Tory propaganda and she's still fully committed to the role. Never has the BBC wasted your licence fee on such a clearly, blatantly biased political commentator before, and the mere mention of her name will generally see anybody relatively normal make a face that looks like they've just caught a whiff of a particularly rancid sewer. Another creature that can be quite reminiscent of rancid sewers is Boris Johnson, and Laura has been his biggest cheerleader for quite some time. She's made rather a cock up in her latest show of sycophancy though, and I thought I'd just quickly give you my opinion on it right after this. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to take a quick moment to say that my videos often get thousands more views than I have subscribers. That can only mean that there are people watching who aren't subscribed. That's a difficult thing to deal with. Just have a quick look and make sure you've subscribed and rang the bell. Join the Power to the People family, and whenever you're furious about the right-wing media bias, you can join me for a little bit of straight talking honesty about the bastards that write the headlines. Thank you. Anybody who pays any attention to politics in the UK will have become aware of the fact that Boris Johnson has reared his ugly, deceitful head again in an attempt to drum up sales for his upcoming book of memoirs. Despite him being the worst Prime Minister in the history of the United Kingdom, there are still, and will always likely be, several sycophantic fuckwits that seem to live in the fetid crack of his sweaty arse, and Laura Keunssberg is definitely one of them. Of course, what Boris wants, the BBC will bend over backwards to give him. So they hastily arranged an interview in which he could spout lies, bullshit and revisionist nonsense about his time as the worst Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and intended to give it a prime time slot next Thursday. And who better to conduct that interview than his biggest fan and personal friend, Laura Keunssberg? Maybe they thought a little bit of time on air with her favourite fat bastard would cheer Laura up a bit. She's had a particularly upsetting few months as she's had to watch her beloved Tory party annihilated in their worst defeat in history. Poor Laura has had to interview many Labour MPs recently, and while anybody with any normal level of cognizance can see the barely contained hatred simmering just below the surface of her passive-aggressive smarm, the BBC does have to maintain some level of the appearance of impartiality. Of course, this charade falls apart quicker than an IKEA cabinet, or indeed a Conservative Party cabinet headed by the fat fuckwit Johnson himself under any kind of scrutiny. However, the average chap or chapess in the street doesn't ever compare the jovial chats she has on a Sunday morning with the dregs of the Tory party to the cold, perfunctory, smear-laden conversations she has with any MP that isn't from the Tory party, particularly those from Labour, so they may not have noticed just how differently she treats the two. It has, however, been leaked that Mrs. Keunssberg has accidentally sent Ballbag Johnson the complete list of questions that she was planning to ask him next Thursday night. Keunssberg and the BBC have of course moved swiftly to quell any rumours that this was deliberate. David Williams and Matt Lucas themselves couldn't have come up with a better example of the sheer piss-taking arrogance the BBC has displayed in trying to pretend that this just was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. They think you're stupid. The Tories and the BBC have been blatantly treating the UK public as if they are crayon-munching backwards toddlers for years now, and the change in government hasn't altered that in any way. In a statement about how she fully intended to forewarn and forearm Johnson, the deceiver, in order for him to maximise the planned softball interview, Laura has said about it, "There's no point pretending it's anything other than embarrassing and disappointing." Yes, Laura, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing that you still think the general public can be fooled into thinking that fat sack of lies and horseshit can come back into politics, and it's disappointing that you weren't sacked a long time ago and yeeted into the Thames with the Tories. Unfortunately, it seems that we still haven't seen the back of Bullbag Johnson, and never will, until he either finally suffers the effects of a life of gluttony and greed and shuffles off the mortal coil, or is jailed for his part in the biggest heist of public funds ever perpetrated on the UK, when the rest of the COVID inquiry examines the VIP lane that he used to help his mates literally embezzle millions from our public funds. There is still quite a large contingent of cockwaffles who can't accept that the public have seen through Johnson, and it doesn't take long to find members of the Bring Back Boris Brigade if you can stomach having to look at the right-wing or Tory publications or the comments on social media sites. The fact that he has had his parliamentary pass revoked and is not actually allowed on the parliamentary estate is seemingly completely ignored, as the likes of Laura and her brethren attempt to lay the groundwork for Boris fucking Johnson to sweep back in after a few years have passed and think he might be able to lead the party again, just when it's time for them to maybe take a victory. Of course, he would never want to lead in opposition. His ego is far too big for that. But we haven't seen the last of him. Instead, the BBC will air another interview by another BBC sycophant next week. Wilfred Frost, another Nepo baby who would no doubt love to see the Tories back in office and be comforted by knowing that the government is committed to looking after the 1% rather than the 99%. They are wealth generators, after all, and remember, it will all trickle down eventually. I'm still waiting for it to trickle down. Are you? Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. Unlike some content creators, I can't quite keep up with the sheer amount of unadulterated bullshit that is still flowing from the right-wing bastards that own most of our media streams. But I thought this one was worth mentioning, as it's come about just when I was starting to research my upcoming 5 Reasons Boris Johnson is a Twat video. It's quite a coincidence, really. Please do remember to hit the like button if you've had a little giggle with me, and if you can help out a bit further, there are links to Patreon and PayPal in the descriptions box, or you can buy me a coffee if you'd just like to make a one-off donation, and of course there's always the button for joining memberships below. A little shout out in this video is going to go to Brian Ferguson, who always watches and often leaves quite a few insightful comments in the comment section. Cheers, mate. As always, that isn't all I have to say, but it is as much of what I've got to say as I'm going to say today. Ta-da. If you can help out a little bit further, there are links to oh, for God's sake. Well, I buggered that up, didn't I, Anne? Yeah. Definitely